Let's review a debate taking place via email between none other than Noam Chomsky and Sam Harris. The subject matter will be centered around collateral damage and the role of human intentions in the morality of foreign interventions. The discussion is about 10,000 words long, but can be distilled significantly. Harris initiates the debate by citing some passages of his book, The End of Faith, where he criticizes Chomsky's view regarding America's foreign interventions. In his book 9/11, with rubble of the World Trade Center still piled high and smoldering, Chomsky urged us not to forget that the US itself is a leading terrorist state. In support of this claim, he catalogues a number of American misdeeds, including the sanctions that the United States imposed upon Iraq, which led to the death of maybe 500,000 children, and the 1998 bombing of the Al-Shifa pharmaceutical plant in Sudan, which may have set the stage for tens of thousands of innocent Sudanese to die of tuberculosis, malaria, and other treatable diseases. Chomsky does not hesitate to draw moral equivalences here. For the first time in modern history, Europe and its offshoots were subjected on home soil to the kind of atrocity that they routinely have carried out elsewhere. For Harris, there is no moral equivalence between foreign interventions of Western countries and attacks like 9/11. The main argument that he will build and will be discussed throughout can be mapped out quite simply. His first premise is delineated by his words on the intentions of Western countries. Take the bombing of the Al-Shifa pharmaceutical plant. According to Chomsky, the atrocity of September 11 pales in comparison with that perpetrated by the Clinton administration in August 1998. But let us now ask some very basic questions that Chomsky seems to have neglected to ask himself. What did the US government think it was doing when it sent cruise missiles into Sudan, destroying a chemical weapon site used by Al-Qaeda? Did the Clinton administration intend to bring about the deaths of thousands of Sudanese children? No. Was our goal to kill as many Sudanese as we could? No. Were we trying to kill anyone at all? Not unless we thought members of Al-Qaeda would be at the Al-Shifa facility in the middle of the night. From this, Harris's second premise can be intuited. Nothing in Chomsky's account acknowledges the difference between intending to kill a child because of the effects you hope to produce on its parents — we call this terrorism — and inadvertently killing a child in an attempt to capture or kill an avowed child murderer — we call this collateral damage. In both cases a child has died, and in both cases it's a tragedy, but the ethical status of the perpetrators, be they individuals or states, could hardly be more distinct. On these premises, Harris will rest his conclusion. For Chomsky, intentions do not seem to matter. Body count is all. Chomsky will start off by saying that he never suggested that there was a moral equivalence between the Al-Shifa bombing and 9/11. Let's turn to what you did say, a disquisition on moral equivalence. You failed to mention, though, that I did not suggest that they were morally equivalent, and in fact indicated quite the opposite. I did not describe the Al-Shifa bombing as a horrendous crime committed with wickedness and awesome cruelty. Rather, I point out that the toll might be comparable, which on inquiry, which is not undertaken here, and which apologists for a crime ignore, turns out to be quite likely a serious understatement. Regarding intentions instead, Noam Chomsky will levy an attack on Sam Harris's first premise. You also ignored the fact that I had already responded to your claim about lack of intention. The following is from Radical Priorities 2003. Most commentary on the Sudan bombing keeps to the question of whether the plant was believed to produce chemical weapons. True or false, that has no bearing on the magnitude with which the aggression interfered with key values in the society attacked, such as survival. Others point out that the killings were unintended, as are many of the atrocities we rightly denounce. In this case, we can hardly doubt that the likely human consequences were understood by US planners. The act can be excused then only on the Hegelian assumption that Africans are mere things, whose lives have no value. Harris, though, is still left wondering what Chomsky thinks the significance of intentions is. It still seems to me that everything you have written here ignores the moral significance of intention. The difference between intending to harm someone and accidentally harming them is enormous, if for no other reason than that the presence of harmful intent tells us a lot about what a person or group is likely to do in the future. In response, Chomsky will launch an offensive on both of Harris's premises. If you had read further before launching your accusations, the usual procedure in work intended to be serious, you would have discovered that I also reviewed the substantial evidence about the very sincere intentions of Japanese fascists while they were devastating China, Hitler in the Sudetenland and Poland, etc. There is at least as much reason to suppose that they were sincere as Clinton was when he bombed Al-Shifa. Much more so, in fact. Therefore, if you believe what you are saying, you should be justifying their actions as well. I also reviewed other cases, pointing out that professing benign intentions is the norm for those who carry out atrocities and crimes, perhaps sincerely and surely more plausibly than in this case. As I've discussed for many years, in fact, decades, benign intentions are virtually always professed, even by the worst monsters, and hence carry no information even in the technical sense of that term. Chomsky explains that good-intentioned people can be some of the worst monsters in history, so for him, when discussing the morality of foreign attacks, intentions don't carry any information. But for Harris, Chomsky's position still appears a bit ambiguous. Your ethical position is still unclear to me. You say that you are not claiming that Clinton intentionally wanted to kill thousands of victims. Okay. But you seem to be suggesting that he had every reason to expect that he would be killing them by his actions, and just didn't care. And you seem disinclined to distinguish the ethics of these cases. The famous linguist will attempt to clarify. On moral grounds, how do we rank 1, intention to kill, as compared with 2, knowledge that of course you will kill but you don't care, like stepping on ants when you walk? As for 1, I have been discussing it for 50 years, explaining in detail why, as we all agree, such professed intentions carry little, if any, weight, and in fact are quite uninformative, since they are almost entirely predictable, even in the case of the worst monsters, and I have also provided evidence that they may be quite sincere, even in the case of these monsters, but we of course dismiss them nonetheless. In contrast, it seems that you have never discussed 1. As for 2, I posed the question, the one serious moral question that arises in the case at issue, and though I didn't give a definite answer, I suggested what I think, that one might argue that on moral grounds, 2 is even more depraved than 1. With this, the discussion unceremoniously ends, with no agreement reached. Chomsky and Harris are great orators and capable of being very civil and extremely well spoken. So it was surprising and unfortunate that the tone of the debate was markedly uncharitable and unpleasant. Chomsky wasn't jumping for joy to engage with what Harris had written of him, and it showed. The substance was obfuscated by repeated interjections regarding misreadings of arguments, or unwillingnesses to engage properly with the questions posed. The title, The Limits of Discourse, as demonstrated by Sam Harris and Noam Chomsky, describes quite well what transpired. Regarding the substance of the debate, it was unexpected that Harris, who espouses a moral theory that is close to a version of consequentialism, was the one bringing up the question of intentions. In fact, sometimes it is argued that a flaw of consequentialist moral theories is that they don't appear to value the intentions of agents when deciding the morality of actions. I don't believe these arguments really work, but nonetheless, interesting that it is the quasi-consequentialist to bring up this point. Moving on. One of the main counterpoints Chomsky was getting at during the debate was that one could suppose with some credibility, given historical precedents, that the leaders of terrorist groups may believe that the civilians they are killing are collateral damage, to liberate their countries and bring about Sharia law everywhere, creating a paradise on earth, or something of the sort. So they could ultimately have quote-unquote noble intentions, as Harris supposes the American government has. I feel like the two debaters could have found more common ground in distinguishing the morality of terrorists and Western governments, focusing on which of the respective approaches was actually more likely to lead to a better state of affairs for all. Indeed, I believe that Harris, as many would, was implicitly assuming that America's approach, the intended state of affairs America was trying to bring about, was obviously better. Perhaps explicitly distinguishing between intentions meant as a mental state in which a person is carrying out his actions, and the consequences the intended state of affairs one is trying to bring about will produce, would have done a fair bit to clarify the debate and ultimately shed light on what the moral difference between the American government and terrorist groups might be. There would have undoubtedly still been room for debate, but at least the discussion would have proceeded further than the limit it reached.